get more defenders on it than we can attackers. Because really, we can only attack with our 2 rooks. Like our knight, we don't want to move from this comfy square. So even
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be almost impossible for us to move our knight to like e4, for example, to attack the pawn a 3rd time. So more important than concentrating on a weak point that already exists is creating another weak point. So how do we go about trying to create another weak point?
We can do it on maybe on the A file, go A4 or...
Yeah, that's exactly right. But what's our plan with A4?
We're going to make him move his pawns. We're going to try to open up the A file, and we're going to create more weaknesses on this side.
Right. So how are we gonna try to create a weakness on another weakness on the queen side? What's the goal?
Going A3 afterwards.
Okay, right. So white played A3 actually to stop you. But yeah, you're right. But okay, so now how is black gonna open up files?
Well, might as well continue with the B file and go B5.
Okay, yeah. So you're actually right. B5 is the eventual goal, but the problem with B5 right now is that
it's sacrificing a pawn.
Well, no, it's not, because our knight can recapture. But the problem with B5 is that it opens up the C file, and this pawn becomes weak. So there's actually a move black can play first to that's kind of tricky that allows us to play B5 when it's most advantageous for us.
Mm-hmm.
So the move is C5.
C5, okay.
Right. So now the point is, okay, so say white moves something. Now when we play B5, and now when he takes, now this pawn is firmly defended by this pawn, and so we don't have to worry about white's rooks infiltrating on the C file. However, more importantly, if after C5 white captures en passant, when we recapture with our pawn, now our pawns are beautiful. This knight defends this, and we have a ready-made avenue of attack, and we have another weakness, this B2 pawn. And actually, this B2 pawn is something that can't be defended for very long. So so now black has a simple plan of just doubling on the B file. So C5 is a clever move that allows us to play B5 when it's advantageous for us. Whereas if we played it immediately, the problem is now this pawn is weak, and if we can never play C5 now because en passant is a lot worse. So we want to have an en passant where we can recapture with a pawn and thus opening the file. So I mean, our whole idea is to open up the B file because this pawn is weak. But by playing C5 first, it allows us to do that when it's advantageous for us. Because there's really no rush. I mean, white can't do anything. White's just going to be sitting, shuffling pieces back and forth. So C5 was a very good move, a very good technique in order to create the second weakness. So white's just shuffling. So of course now we play B5. So takes. I mean, no reason not to. Eventually we're going to get a rook on B8 anyway. So knight takes B5. So he gives us a check. We don't care. Move up. So take. And again, now notice how how white can't use this H file at all, because this square, this square, this square, and this square are all defended. So, so white realizes that his check did nothing, and so he says king d2, knight d4, bishop g4. Okay, now we're ready to attack this pawn. So we play rook fb8. So we want this rook to defend this pawn in case of some bishop d1 or something.
Right, it's on a light square, yeah.
Yeah, but now we have this advantage where we can just double up on the rook on the So after e1, so white's going to try to open up this e file somehow by playing f4 and then trying to get this rook active. But we're just getting ready to double, so rook a7, bishop d1. And now we get our king into the game with king f6. So now we're defending this square. This knight is defending this square, and our pawn is defending this square. So on f4, we don't mind taking, because now, again, notice that all these squares are defended on the e file, so he has no way to infiltrate. Okay, so now the question is, after g takes f4, okay, how does black continue using the principle, the fact that there's multiple weaknesses for white on both sides of the board?
Well, doubling loses a pawn, so that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Knight b3 would kick the rook, but that.
We don't want to exchange that knight for that bishop.
Right.
Is the point. So our knight's good where it is.
G5 kind of opens up towards the king, but exposes your king.
Right, and also that pawn on F4 is weaker than our pawn on G6 right now.
Right. So the rook on B8, bring it over to H8.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. Yeah, so rook H8. So the idea now is we're actually threatening a strong attack with rook H7, and then getting play on the H file. So actually, when White opened up the H file, it ended up helping us more than it helped White. So instead has to exchange rooks for fear of getting a strong attack against him. So he has to play rook H1. So now we take, king takes, and now how does Black finish up? So now notice how far away White's king is from the action, whereas notice how close our king is to the action.
Right. So, yeah, bring the king into the center of the board, centralize, and...
Right. So king F5. So now notice how this knight takes away all the squares from the bishop.
Mm-hmm.
So, so Black plays rook G2, or White plays rook G2, so threatening that if we take here, he takes here.
Mm-hmm.
But of course we don't care, because after take king E5, simply defend the pawn, and now we're attacking this pawn. So White has to play rook G5 check, but now we get our king in even further, king E4. And now rook H5, rook A8, trying to establish maximum distance so that our rook can swing over if need be. King G1, rook B8. So now we're willing to exchange this pawn for this pawn, because if we take this pawn on B2, then this pawn on A3 will fall by force. So bishop takes A4, nothing better, because otherwise this pawn is being lost for nothing. So bishop takes A4, rook takes B2, king F1, and now king E3. Setting up a mating net now. So now Black's threatening just to play knight F3 and rook F2 mate. So White plays rook H3, Black plays knight F3, and White resigns because rook F2 mate is coming, and so this is forced, and then Black can just play this, and it's over. So, so yeah, I mean, the fact that Black got this monstrous knight on D4 meant that he could get his king in much sooner than White, and he was able to use the fact that White had to concentrate on both the queen side with this pawn on B2 and the king side with the H file, and White can contain both threats, simultaneously. So Black was able to make progress and win. But it was all, of course, due to the fact that he had a strong knight on D4. So those examples make sense of how we think about, making use of weak squares and then taking advantage of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So now let's look from move 1 on how we might take advantage of a weak square. So we'll just play through an opening, and we'll see how we can take advantage
Petrov
of
defense,
squares
Petrov.
even from move 1.
All right, the Russian defense. Good stuff.
Yeah, so this is the 4 pawns. But it's
4
going to
knights.
transpose into a Steinitz. So this is a Rilopez Steinitz by transposition. Okay, so White plays D4 here. And now theory recommends that Black plays bishop D7 here. But Black played pawn takes pawn, which is unjustified. But because Black shouldn't be happy about exchanging central pawns until he's better developed. Because right now, White's ahead in development, so he shouldn't be, looking to open up the center until he's better developed. So bishop D7 makes more sense, but I mean, it's not a huge blunder, but okay. So bishop takes, and Black here plays B takes because he wants to keep the 2 bishops, which makes sense. And if bishop takes C6, then after knight takes and queen F3, White's lead in development and Black's kind of awkward pawn structure means that White should have an advantage. So he wants to keep the two bishops as at least some form of advantage in return for having slightly mangled pawn structure.
Mm-hmm.
So now White plays Queen F3. And so Black chases the knight away with C5. White plays knight to F5. And this knight is actually very strong because it's hard for Black to develop because now this bishop can't move because the knight takes G7. And if G6, then bishop G5, pawn takes knight, E5, pawn takes pawn. Bishop takes knight, and of course queen can't take because of queen takes rook. So he has to play E4, and simply knight takes E4. It's crushing. Because now this rook is hanging. So if pawn takes, queen takes, bishop block, I can just take the rook. So since G6 is impossible, and since the bishop can't move, Black's pretty much forced to capture this knight. So bishop takes F5. Okay, so we take back with the queen. Okay, and now do you already start to see where a weak square might be happening?
The whole queenside pawn structure has a lot of weaknesses.
Yeah, but particularly which square would be weak?
Well, on D5 we have an outpost, and then
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about D5 a little bit. So okay, is this square weak?
Well, he's got the knight defending it.
Right. Remember, when we talk about weak squares, we don't talk about the pieces, just the pawns.
Right. Okay. So
is that square weak?
Yeah, he can play C6.
Right. Okay, but let's think about that for a second. So right now the square, by the truest sense of definition, is not weak because if we were to put a piece there, then it could be chased away with C6. But what does C6 do that's bad?
It weakens other squares like D6.
Right. Exactly. And what is D6 now? What does D6 become if you play C6?
It's a backwards pawn.
Yeah, exactly. So, by the truest sense of the word, D5 is not weak, but in reality it is because in order for Black to unweaken it, he'd have to play a move that weakens something else. So eventually something's going to be weak, whether it's D5, D6, something. So already Black has, starting to see some issues. So, okay, so Queen D7, trying to exchange queens. White says no. Getting a open rook on the B file. So White just castles. Bishop B7, B3 in order to develop this bishop without hanging a pawn, and now Black castles. So now these squares are getting to be a problem. These light squares. So C6 indeed is also going to be a problem. I mean, of course, it's not supported, but C6 is technically a weak square because there's no B pawn, no D pawn. And F5 might be an issue too because there's no E pawn, and if G6, it weakens other squares that this bishop might be able to take advantage of. So Black's whole light square complex is a little bit of an issue. Okay, so given that, what should White do here in order to kind of bring these issues to the forefront?
Should he play knight D5 immediately? Is now a good time?
Well, knight D5 immediately. The problem with that is, we're kind of compromising our.
Oh, okay. He can't move F7 because the knight's there.
Our control of that square, and we're putting a pawn there. I mean, which is fine, but we're kind of reducing the amount of pieces that we have, and now we can't really take advantage of the light square weaknesses because all we have is this dark square bishop left. So after knight D5, for example, Black could just take and play bishop F6, and now Black's pieces are starting to look more active than White's. So we want to make sure that we don't rush into exchanges without making sure, we're giving. Because now also with this pawn on D5, now this pawn is never going to be weak. because this file is blocked. So we want to make sure we don't rush into anything. So what else could we try?
We can try to exchange off their knight then, and so they only have a dark squared bishop, and we have control of the white square.